Okay. Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salat wa salam ala Rasulullah. Welcome to We Are All Okay Wednesday. With the topic I'm actually really excited about, trial or trauma. The story we tell ourselves shapes the life we live, which is that last sentence, the story we tell ourselves shapes the life we live, is very much the what we share it back to the fitra. From all aspects, but let's talk about it from the perspective of trauma and how reframing our experience through an Islamic lens turns hardship into elevation instead of identity. And if we use language like trauma, it can lock us in the past. And then, those experiences can become part of our identity, something we are rather than something that we went through. And that's really has a profound difference in our experience, keeping us stuck in the wound rather than in wisdom. Trials, however, point us towards Allah. So in Islam, hardship is understood as a test that purifies, strengthens, and elevates us, an opportunity for reward and spiritual growth, not a life sentence. So your experience follows your framing. Two people can live through exactly the same challenge and walk away with a very different reality. And when we see the difficulties as trials, we look for the meaning, growth, and divine wisdom instead of remaining defined by the pain. So I hope you're ready for this awesome topic, inshallah. And I have to attribute the idea and the concept of comparing trial and trauma to Sister Sarah from our alumni group, who brought it up with those words in our alumni session on Tuesday morning, subhanallah. And while this is a concept that we at Back to the Future have understood for a long time, the comparison with the language of trial and trauma was kind of an insight for us, because I have been teaching about calamity in Islam for decades, actually. I think I remember my first time I shared a topic around calamity would have been in the early 2000s. And the reason I was sharing it was because for someone that came from a non-Muslim background and went through a lot, seeing how Islam framed these things was incredibly inspiring and helpful and hopeful. And yet now, decades later, we have the trauma movement out there, and we see our brothers and sisters in Islam getting caught up in that movement and utilizing that language and believing what is being said. And this distancing them away from the well-being they can experience if they were to see it through an Islamic worldview, that it's a trial and a test. I want you to just think for a moment, or reflect for a moment, when you think of a trial versus thinking of a trauma. Does one feel lighter and one feel heavier? I certainly feel that a trial feels lighter, it feels more temporary, whereas a trauma feels heavy and more permanent. And this is also something to do with language and how language is used, and so therefore how we understand words. And so you could have a completely separate reality and not even experience those words the way I'm experiencing them, just like we've said here. Two people can go through the same experience and experience it differently. One could experience it traumatically, another one could experience it as a beautiful life lesson that's helped strengthen them and grow. Now, it's interesting, before I was a Muslim, my worldview was whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. This was something that must have been repeated to me a lot growing up. And so as I went through lots of tests, even before I became a Muslim, those tests didn't defeat me, and I didn't really look at what I went through the lens of trauma. And in fact, trauma wasn't a word that was bandied around back then like it is now. And so I actually was quite resilient and did grow stronger through the tests and challenges that I went through. And I'm not talking about small things. I'm talking about things that people would find are quite a big deal. I'm going to give you one of the lesser of them so you understand. So probably if I look at the scheme of things in my childhood life anyway, as the least traumatic of the big experiences in my life would be the bushfires that burnt my house down, where we one day went to school, and by the next day, the only things we possessed were the clothes on our back because everything had been burnt. Apart from Mum's spinning wheel, it was near the door and she grabbed it and threw it in the car. So, you know, we had a spinning wheel. It was really useful. SubhanAllah, it's so funny the things human beings do in the stress of the moment. Alhamdulillah. Anyway, the point is that when we see our experiences as being the qadr of Allah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows us, knows our capability, knows what we need to grow, what lessons we need to see or experience to become a better version of ourselves, the rubbing that we need to have to polish us. He sends us the perfect trials and tests for us to struggle through, so we grow, so we learn, so we do better. So we push against things that help us stretch our wings. Actually, it's funny the things that pop into your mind as you're speaking, but you know, the research says that, you know, babies that are born, you know, born naturally, the struggle of coming out through the birth canal is part of what helps kickstart certain things within their body that have to kickstart when they're born. And relating, for instance, to breathing air, as opposed to breathing the amniotic fluid, which is what's happening when they're inside. And so when they're removed by cesarean section, we kind of have to artificially stimulate them because they don't get that same stress that's required, you know, through coming through the birth canal. And so there is such this beauty in those challenges and those moments that are part of our growth. However, if we believe in what's said out there, if we believe that certain things are meant to destroy us, break us, that we're meant to hold on to the idea that because we've gone through that, we're changed forever, that if we've now been changed forever, that means it is forever, that now we're a different person and we're going to behave differently, and that's a life sentence. If we believe all this rhetoric that's out there, which, by the way, is a myth, it's a myth. And I'm studying currently with doing an intensive with a psychiatrist who has seen some of the worst cases ever and has seen them come out the other side back to their well-being, is proof that this isn't a forever sentence. And the people who are saying that it is only understand our human experience from a psychological perspective, and they are missing a key element that we have in our deen, which is the spiritual element. And one thing that Allah tells us in the Quran, which can actually back this up 100% is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can say be, and it is. Meaning if he decides where to be healed, we will be healed, and nothing can get in the way of that, and nothing can stop that, because it is in fact Allah who is al-Shafi. Allah is the one that heals us. And so having this Islamic spiritual lens to look at our experience through is what makes the entire difference to our experience. Because when we realize that it's the qadr of Allah, then we realize that Allah knows what's going on, that he hasn't forsaken us, but there is some khair in it, one way or another, even if in the moment of experiencing it, we can't see that. And there will be times when we really can't see it. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said that as long as we're mindful of him, he will find a way out for us from every difficulty and provide for us from means we could not imagine. And whoever puts their trust in Allah, Allah is sufficient for us, meaning that just because we can't see how we could possibly get through it or how we could possibly heal from it, doesn't mean we can't, because it just means we can't see how right now, because we're human. And we're human, and we only have the knowledge, the experience, the understanding that Allah has blessed us with, and that there's so much more beyond what we know. And trusting in that and having tawakkul and having husnul dhan billah, good thinking of Allah, is the answer, is the solution. So when we see it as trauma, it locks us up in a world of thinking that has us trapped in our past, believing that we behave like this because of what's happened, and so we're always going to behave like that, and that's who we are. I'm an anxious person, or I can't be in crowds anymore, or all of these things that we tell ourselves, that we label ourselves because I'm a rescuer, or a people pleaser, or these things that we hang on to as being our identity. They're not. They're behavior patterns that at some point seemed helpful to survive whatever it is that we were going through. But we're not going through it anymore, so those behavior patterns don't serve us anymore, but we haven't let go of them. Because somewhere along the line, we've got a misunderstanding about our experience. And when we get to the understanding of it, we understand that these things that have happened, they're not meant to break us. They're pointing us back to Allah. And that whatever it is, it's a test, and we can pass that test. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is there for us. We turn to him. And we understand that in some ways it may be purifying us. In some ways it may be strengthening us. In some ways it may be teaching us something that we're missing, something that we need to know. So the way you experience these things is how you frame it. You can frame yourself into a prison of trauma, or you can frame yourself with the freedom of the trial and the test, and the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, and that his mercy is greater than his wrath, and that the mercy we see from Allah in this life is only 1% of his mercy. That every verse, every chapter bar one in the Quran starts with how compassionate and merciful he is. And if we start framing it through that and appreciating that the one who is in control, who has all power and might in everything that we are going through, is a merciful, loving God, then we have hope. And we understand that, okay, I am feeling uncomfortable, maybe even feeling in pain right now, going through something. But that's okay. It's only temporary. It's a trial. We can ask ourselves a simple question. What am I meant to do with that? How can I be my best self through that? And that is wisdom. That is the wisdom in the moment. The pause. Last week I did the power of the pause. You can go back and look at that. Last weekend, I'm not going to go into any detail about it, but we had a huge family situation, huge, one that is going to be months or even years before we recover from it. And it could be something that would have meant I cancelled today because I could still be in shock around it. It was big. But alhamdulillah, for the most part through it, I was calm. I got a bit snappy towards my grandson, recognized that. And so I asked somebody to come and join me while I was babysitting and bring their child too. So I had some companionship. And that's all I needed was that companionship, that connection. And then I was fine and the kids were fine. So I recognized when my thinking was getting the better of me. So as I said, the repercussions of this weekend will probably reverberate in our life for months and years. And it could have been something to break me. And therefore, you would have found me canceling everything. But it's not, because I'm looking at it through an Islamic lens. Because I'm looking through it as, well, there must be a test in here, a strengthening in here, a purification in here. I've already seen how through this, some of my older children have stepped up in ways I haven't seen from them before. So there's already the signs, the milestones of the beauty of this. I don't know, because I'm not sure who's here that might be familiar with the Australian bush, but for many Australian native plants, for the seeds to germinate, they need a bushfire, which is why the native Australians, the First Nation Australians, used to do controlled burning because that would rejuvenate the land, because new vegetation couldn't grow or germinate without a fire. It needed the heat to crack the seed open. And I think that that's what I witnessed with some of my children over the weekend with what happened, that it was like the fire that cracked the seed open to germinate. SubhanAllah. So that's, I guess, a metaphor to really cover what we're saying is sometimes this pressure or this heat that we're put in is to crack the seed open so something can germinate from it, subhanallah. And I'll leave you with that hopeful way of looking at it and open it up for anyone who has any questions or any takeaways they want to share. Anyone got a question? Anyone got a takeaway? Usually this topic, everyone wants to challenge me. Yeah, but what about if it was this? What about if it was that? I've heard stories of some of the most horrendous things people could go through, and people having the resilience through it simply by the way they think about it. So no one wants to jump on and share a takeaway? Actually, I just realized I haven't got the chat open and you might be chatting to me in the chat. No takeaways? Well, if there's no questions or takeaways, we'll just leave you to reflect on this and have a look back over your life and see where you might have held onto a story, a trauma story around something that's happened, and see if you can reframe it as a trial story and see if you can see yourself being released from that past, because that's really what it takes, is that shift in thinking. And anyone who's listening to this as a recording, please share your takeaways or your questions in the comments below the recording, because we always love to hear what you take away from each of our sessions. So I'm going to leave you on that note. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdika shura la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.